Good morning. Welcome to today's program of Struggles of the Spirit. We're talking today about absolute meaning and purpose in society. And we have as our guest Dr. Robert Stanford, Professor of Sociology at the University of Vermont. And also he's been very active over a number of years in theater, in the lyric theater and also theater on the university campus. Bob, we're delighted to have you here today, and we want to pick your brain and hopefully invite the public to join us here at 12 o'clock to further our discussions about absolute meaning and purpose in society. I'm Reverend Udell. I'm an Episcopal priest, and for many years I was chaplain at the medical center in Burlington. Now this is one of the many different things I'm doing, and I'm glad you've chosen to watch the program. We're trying to look at religion in the broad sense of the term, and values, and the subject of meaning, and that's why we have Dr. Stanfield here today. So often we only consider religion as dealing with meaning and purpose on an absolute sense, and we say, oh, well, that's a religious kind of faith belief. That's something that comes out of someone's heart. But secular society doesn't get into those kinds of things. We're pragmatic, we're objective, we're scientific. We don't fall prey to subjective emotions like people who are religious. We sort of stand above that, and we subject to public dialogue, our political process, the different goals we have for our nation and for our local towns and state. We think that somehow we're exempt from meaning and purpose on an absolute level. But what I'm suggesting today in our presentation is that society does have value judgments. Society does make these value judgments about what they consider to be absolute meaning, absolute purpose. Well, I'd like to just leave it at that point and ask Dr. Stanfield to go ahead here, Bob, and jump in, and I would like to dialogue with you as we go along.
Well, perhaps the way to begin is to indicate the kind of framework that I work in. I'm a sociologist, and that's a focus and a study of people interacting with each other, people in groups. It's perhaps a little distance from theology, but it may follow Alexander's Pope that presume not God to scan the proper study of mankind as man. And so the look is what happens among people. And the framework that I work in, let me just say that at the university, the courses I teach have to do with deviant behavior, with crime, with delinquency, with law, and how this comes to terms with the problems of conflict within society, expressing itself in deviance or in crime. But I do that in a broad theoretical context about the nature of societies, and all societies have to come to terms with some issues of absolute meaning and purpose. And sometimes that's done in a religious context, sometimes it's done in a non-religious context, through the culture, through some kinds of basic scientific ideas, and sometimes it's a struggle to come to a conclusion about absolute meaning and purpose, but it's got to be there. One of my old theory teachers said that one of the basic requirements of a society is that it define its boundaries and decide who's within the boundaries and who's outside. So that every group, every organization, not only a society, every community has the question, who are we? The two questions, who are we and where are we going? And in a way, you could say that that's the kind of question that's involved in absolute meaning and purpose. Who are we, and where are we going? Whether it be a society, a state, a community, or just a group, there's always that question. Who are we, and how does that relate to them, the other? And where are we going? What is it that we are trying to accomplish? What are we trying to get out of life, get out of our relationships to each other?
Would you see, Bob, even in a microcosm way, that would apply to our current Vermont struggle to try to improve schools in their quality of education, the public schools, to try to spread the financial support of those schools equally throughout the state? That brings up, I would think, some of those issues there.
Yeah, but that becomes an extension of what my old theory teacher said, and that is, in the general framework, who are we and where are we going? There are other things that have to be handled. One of them is the allocation of resources. How do we do the job that needs to be done when we are going to educate children? How is it going to be done? Where are we going to find the resources? How are we going to dedicate them? And that's a decision that has to be made in a political context, a political community. What are our goals then, and how are we going to achieve those goals? How do we develop the means for it? The particular context here in Vermont introduces another element, and that's the element of law. And that is the court saying, in terms of some of the absolute values or basic values of Vermont society, the way we have been allocating resources to education is a violation of those basic principles expressed in the Vermont Constitution. So in a way, all of those things work together and bring it back to some of the basic values that the society treasures and sometimes expresses in a thing like a constitution, in a document that is taken as the baseline against which everything else is to be measured. You can't necessarily draw what the outcome will be in terms of, you can't predict from that quest for meaning just how the state of Vermont will decide it's going to resolve the very particular question. But the basic thing goes back again to the Constitution, the interpretation by the justices that in that original document was the sense that there needs to be the education of youth, and that opportunity should exist throughout the state. And what they've done is expand to that the notion of the equality of education for all children within the state.
So that would be an absolute that at least some people are assuming should be held by all.
That ultimately, in making the decisions about resources, you need to go back to a standard of equal opportunity for education for all children in the state, and that becomes an absolute or basic value. Now, there we see it expressed in a political document or in a social document that doesn't necessarily have a religious context, except that if we look back at the time that the Constitution, the 1777 Constitution of the Republic of Vermont was created, and then the continuation of that into statehood in 1791. We have a society there that very much thought of education in terms of the context of religion, of the churches. And so it was tied up with religious definitions and religious values as well. Now, insofar as you talk about our society as a secular society, what we really mean is that we're a more secular society than might have been the case a century or 2 centuries ago. We live in a situation where there's a dualism in the conception of society, and I think that's built into some of our fundamental religious ideas. At least the ideas that there is a world of the spirit and there's a world of the flesh, that there is a spiritual society and there's a secular society. So if you talk about our society as a secular society, I think you're saying it's more secular and less spiritual than we would see if we look back 200 years or even even longer, look back a millennium.
But now, how would you as a sociologist define those words secular and religious? Because so often we think about, well, religion is very different than secular, and values are only religious values. That secular world, well, we're only out there to earn a living, to keep the roads decent so we don't break our axle, get the roads plowed and salted. There are no absolute convictions that are involved in secular society.
I'm not sure that's the case.
I don't believe that. But
no, I think there are values out there that exist whether the society is secular or not. Every once in a while you see a considerable amount of media attention about things that bother people, that there seems to be a fairly high consensus, not perhaps 100%, but a strong consensus, wait a minute, that's not right. That's not the right thing to do. It is true that in a wide range of things in our society, I think one of the things that strikes me as bothersome is that we tend to look at things so relativistically that we try to avoid saying right and wrong. Mm-hmm. And I've got my own personal dislike for one particular phrase, and that's the phrase, that's inappropriate behavior, right? Yeah. And that phrase seems to have replaced the idea that's wrong, right? The idea that something is wrong. I figured that we really had gone too far with the debasing of our language when I heard I think a State Department spokesman doing a briefing and suggesting that the behavior of some head of state was inappropriate behavior. I think in an earlier era we just would have said that's wrong. That's not the right thing to do.
Why the change? I mean, it's an absolute value that's changed. Why has this absolute changed?
I think we have the feeling that perhaps there are no absolutes out there. I think there's a sense of relativism in the world. And part of it is the recognition that we do not have a unanimity of opinion about basic values, that we have a considerable amount of diversity. Mm-hmm. And with a considerable amount of diversity, then you want to respect the values of others, and so you begin to question the absoluteness of your own values. You have to recognize what's there with others. That comes back again to the definition of who are we? Mm-hmm. Are we one, or are we many? The United States, well, actually, I guess in creating the United States, when they said e pluribus unum, one out of many, they meant one state, one nation out of many states. Mm-hmm. But you could apply that as well to personhood or to collectivities of people. Are we one as an American people, or are we so diverse that it's hard to come up with a single definition of who we are?
There was ever since I can remember, I've learned this is supposed to be a melting pot where we all sort of melt down to some ooze, Spanish and Irish and German and Chinese and African and all the rest. We get down to some kind of basic protoplasm. However, in recent years, particularly with the Black is Beautiful awareness, people begin to say, no, I don't want to lose track of my roots. And there are many an Irishman who does not want to lose track of his roots either. Mm. And so we're not wanting to be one necessarily. Mm.
I've been fascinated with that concept of the melting pot. I've talked with students about it, and I asked them about it. Do you know what a melting pot is? Let's think back to it. It turns out that it's a metaphor of the late 19th century. It's an industrial metaphor. Mm. The melting pot is the huge vat into which you put a lot of ores, and you heat it up, iron plus other things, to produce an alloy. Mm-hmm. A melting pot is something you produce an alloy from. And the idea was that we are taking peoples from many places in the world and we are putting them into the melting pot of America, and we are producing a new alloy, a new kind of substance, mm-hmm. which is stronger and more powerful than would any one of those alone. And I've said one of the problems, though, at the same time they tried to talk about the melting pot, is that if you look at the melting pots of the steel mills, there is the steel that's poured off. But then there's very often, the slag that remains in the pot. And one of the realities of American society, I think, was that in many instances, we cast aside some of the people. We talked about melting down and producing the American, but sometimes we had patterns of racism or discrimination that said, here are groups or here are clusters of individuals who do not form part of this thing called the American. And so we have tossed people on the slag heap of society. That's an issue that bothers us. It doesn't, and it's an issue that's a problem throughout the world. Think of the amount of ethnic conflict that's going on in any number of regions in the world. It's an issue that concerns people in Canada. But the Canadians, in contrast to us, they don't use the image of the melting pot. They think of their society as a mosaic, as a pattern of pieces that form together a particular picture. It's an artistic, not an industrial image that they use.
Native Americans are called First Nations.
Or the Native Canadians. The Native peoples of Canada, actually they refer to themselves as the First Nations. The English-speaking and French-speaking people of Canada were presumptuous and declared that they were the founding nations of Canada, and then all others came, and the native peoples came along and said, now wait a minute, you English-speaking and French-speaking people may want to call yourself founding nations, but don't forget that we were the first nations of Canada. Yes, I think native peoples represent one of those groups that was in the history of North America cast onto the slag heap, or set aside, at least for a while, as not really forming part of the mosaic. But images like that, images like melting pot and mosaics, are ways in which the society tries to come to terms with who are we? What is it? This matter of unity and diversity is a concern in the United States, a concern in Canada. A few years ago, at the time of there was a Charlottetown Agreement made in 1992 trying to find a way of pulling Canada together. And in the agreement, one section is headed, Unity and Diversity. To be one and many at the same time. So Canada wrestles with that. The United States wrestles with that. And essentially any kind of system of that federates people, that brings collectivities of people together, will be struggling with that notion. How can we be one and many at the same time?
So, getting back to the theme a little bit, I enjoy these explorations of examples and tangents because they make it all richer. But who determines what will be the current, quote unquote, absolute? Who determines that? Is I sometimes say there must be a Wizard of Oz who decides what the basic colors will be. There's a certain shade of orange you can't buy in any store because the Wizard of Oz has decided, although that used to be very popular in the early 60s, it's no longer appropriate anymore, and so you can't get it. So who decides these absolutes? Who is there an individual or is there a group? I'm obviously setting this up a little bit, but it's still an important issue. How do these absolutes form, and who and how are they changed, and why did we permit them to change as a people?
I'm not sure that you can identify a maker of absolutes or a maker of values. I think it's a progressive development that involves the interchanges among people over time. There are contexts in which whatever values are emerging or changing or altering enter into public discourse. But then it's a matter of determining who communicates, who has the access to get the word out and to put it forward. So you'll find, I think here in the 20th century, the proliferation of media, the creation of things like television, are things that widen the opportunities for a discourse. Maybe the problem is that rather than discourse, we get sound bites, and sound bites are supposed to substitute for some fundamental thought. But the ideas, the themes are there, they emerge. I think back to another professor I had who said that most of the basic values, the absolute values of a society can be expressed along just a few dimensions, that every society, every organization has to decide what's our relationship to time. Are we concerned about the present moment? Are we building for the future? Are we looking back to our past? It's not that you choose one and neglect the other, but are you living in the future or are you living in the present? That's one of the fundamental kinds of issues that I think our society has struggled with. The notion of a success ethic is bound very often with the idea that you're prepared to sacrifice things in the present for the future. When you say to someone, now when you graduate from high school, you're going to go to college. What you're saying is, are you going to postpone involvement in the world of work? Are you going to accept limited resources in terms of doing something that will get you ready for a time later, that you're going to defer the advantages you'll have for the future? A commitment to education is a commitment in time. It's a way of saying we care more about the future than for the present, or we're putting a little bit more emphasis on the future than the present. Environmental concerns, I think, also show that as well. We've got to be careful about what we do in the present because of the implications that it has for the future. A second thing that you get basic values on would be the attitude that you have toward nature, as to whether you take nature and try to bend it to the will of man, that nature is there for you to take hold of and use, or a second view is that nature is something you just have to learn to live with, that you don't try to overcome it. When flooding comes, what do you do about it? Do you try to change the course of rivers? Do you erect things that are going to prevent the flooding from occurring? Or do you take that attitude, well, the floods are just something we're going to have to expect. We flooded out this year, we'll rebuild on the floodplain again, and maybe it won't happen for another 25 years. Third kind of orientation is one that was hard to recognize in American society, but we've learned from other people in the world that sometimes you have to live in harmony with nature, that you can't bend it to your will, or it's not just a matter of accepting what nature does, but somehow or the other working with nature. A third orientation, a third basic value has to do with activity. Whether you want to achieve, whether you want to do things, or whether the objective in life is just to enjoy things and experience things. My teachers also said there's another thing, and that is that in experience you become something more, and that comes close to a spiritual kind of conception of what you ought to be doing in life. So are you a doer, a beer, or are you a becomer, is another way to put it. And then finally is the relationship to other people. Do you have responsibility to the parents, to the older generation? And you could put that then as well to the young. Is it the parent-child relationship the primary one? Is it orientation to peers? Is the most important thing your relationship to brothers and sisters in the broad sense, people of the same age? And the third kind of orientation might be one, is the most important person yourself, the individual. with a lesser responsibility for taking care of parents or fitting in with the peers. So you find all of the expressions of these things, and they come into combinations. And one thing, perhaps, I mean, if you were going to try to talk about some of the basic values of American society, the traditional notion is that we were oriented to the future, that we were individualistic, that we saw ourselves as doers, and that we were prepared to step in and bend the American continent and make it into whatever we wanted to make it. So we would transform the environment that we lived in. Now we look at 20th century America, some people sort of regret that we've modified our values, but some of the criticisms are that we seem to be less, or some of us are less oriented to the future than we were in the past, that we live more in the present, that we're more interested in just enjoying life rather than accomplishing or achieving, overcoming obstacles, and we get into conflicts over how we're going to relate to nature, and that the individualism of the past has given way to way back, David Reisman years ago, The Lonely Crowd.
Yes, I remember the book.
In a way, he was talking about the passing of individualism in American society. He was seeing that in the 1950s. We now institutionalize things. We build things like Social Security and Medicare as vehicles to try to deal with what happens with the passing of generations from one generation to another. So we've undergone transformations in some of our basic values, I think, perhaps in the last century.
How much discussion, sitting down with one another, listening to the public, you really think goes on as we examine values, as we examine and change our absolutes? I would think that would be very important, but I sometimes anecdotally have the sense that there isn't a lot of exchange, and sometimes in presidential election years there are big issues to be really profoundly discussed beyond the politics of the candidates, and I don't hear much discussion going on.
No. Yeah, I don't think the discourse is there, but that doesn't mean that the values aren't there, lurking behind. I think possibly the problem is a lack of consciousness or awareness of the basic frameworks in which we operate. That we may, on the one hand, sense that everything's relative, but on the other hand, we're prepared sometimes to act as if things really are fixed and absolute. We carry around absolutes lurking there, providing the basic framework of the kinds of choices that we make as individuals. And I think it's not only in this era, but I think in any era, the quest for absolute meaning and purpose is always that effort to become more self-conscious, more self-aware about the basic ideas that form the framework within which you make very, very practical choices, whether they be economic or political or social choices.
There's a real drive to produce something tangible as a result of your tenure, whatever whatever profession your tenure might be in, to build a new church, to build a gymnasium. I'm a New York Cityite. Robert Moses was dreaded and very powerful, but he was somewhat of a benign dictator from my point of view, because he built all kinds of structures in the city that we would have been lost without those structures. And if he hadn't been such a strong power broker, we would have had mediocrity and nothing would have happened, really.
Yeah, but now you're describing the kind of personalities where the basic value seems to be doing. to do something and to think in future terms.
Well, just the urge to leave something for future generations.
But that's
to
not
venerate.
That's not universal. I mean, one of the lines that one may sometimes hear, what's the meaning of life? Whoever accumulates the most toys wins. Yes. And that's more of a consumption. That's not a building. That's a being orientation. That's something that thinks primarily in terms of the present, not doing, not future time, and we've got that kind of difference that we can find among ourselves, within ourselves sometimes, because I think in fact as individuals we probably have a mixture of things. I live in the present, but I also live in the future, and I live in the past as well. I do, and I be, and I think I become. I'm individualistic in some regards, but lineal or collateral in relationship to other generations or the generation of my peers. It's a blend of those things. But when you come up, I guess, with a Robert Moses, then you find someone who's heavily loaded on one side, where the values are somewhat more extreme in one area than in another.
I think we've come to time for, hopefully, phone in. We have a half an hour set aside. We have just begun to deal with the subject of meaning and values, passing relative values and absolute values here. So there's a lot more to talk about. So we encourage you, first of all, to sort of join us here as though you were sitting here at the speakerphone, and we can chat with you on the phone and begin to go further, guided by some of your ideas and your input. So we welcome you to join us. I'll just pause a minute here and give you a chance to phone in. There may be some issues that you would like to explore, that maybe some of our words or ideas brought up a reaction within you. Either if you're a younger person than I am, or you're an older person, we see the world according to who we are and what our experiences are, and we sometimes have a lot of strong emotion around those experiences, and it's really important to hear your thoughts and to hear your statements and your questions.
We did talk a bit about how little there is in the way of discourse on absolute values or absolute meaning and purpose. And I think that may be part of the problem that we have, that we end up talking very, very often about the specifics. And maybe the thing is that, or it seems to me in many instances, that the specifics, the particularities, the things that we find in the newspaper today or in the television news today, or in the television programs that we might be watching, that those are the vehicles that for entry into somewhat more basic questions, to look at the framework of why are we reacting, or why is our society reacting the way it does to that particular issue that's getting such a big play in the newspaper. I think you mentioned that earlier with regard to a matter like the Vermont General Assembly deciding what's going to be done in terms of the financing of education. It seems like a very, very practical issue. Where's the money going to come from, and how do you protect local decision making, and how do you assure that people can get the best education they can for their children? At the same time, you're trying to achieve an equality of opportunity for all children, the education of all children in the state. But once you take those very, very practical issues, you find lurking behind them some of those basic questions of how do we feel about the world we live in the present moment, and what are we thinking about the future, and how much should we be bound to ideas that come to us from the past.
How responsible am I for my neighbor?
Yeah.
Or the children in a neighboring town that may not have the wealth of the town where I live? Are we responsible?
Mm-hmm. Are we responsible for the next generation, or just for our own, or just for ourselves? Those are basic questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think people are afraid to ask that question. It doesn't sound politically wise to ask that question. I was talking with a friend of mine, and I think you know him too, about some of the large corporations that have moved into Vermont for retail purposes, and I said, gee, I think they're going to crush some of the small enterprises because of their buying power. And he said, well, that's the American way. He said, that's okay. That's what it means to be an American. He said, if you've got more money to buy things more cheaply and sell them at a lower rate, that's the American dream. I said, yeah, I know, but the little guy gets crushed. He said, that's not my concern. That's not the concern of an American. And I was interested in his response.
But let me turn it over the other way. The contrary view is the view, again, that defines who are we and where are we going. Is we those who happen to be in Vermont, or is the we whoever happens to be in America? Because the thing comes up again about the corporations that come from outside into the state of Vermont. Mm-hmm. And then some people would complain about the money that flows out.
Yes, right? They would.
But the framework in which you're doing that is saying, who are we? We are the people who are in the state of Vermont. So that there's where you've got a kind of fundamental decision making. Is your focus of reference the state, or is it the nation? Is it the North American continent? Again, I think we in Vermont are particularly conscious of our Canadian neighbors to the north. And when we talk about who we are, we may be talking about ourselves as Vermonters. We may be talking about ourselves as Americans. We may be talking about ourselves as North Americans. And have the sense that we're dealing not only with what happens to be the political boundary of the United States, but almost a kind of common cultural area in North America.
But of course, as you know, people see that issue, our relationship to Canada, differently. When I moved here 26 years ago from New York City, I asked people, where's the closest big city? Because I like big cities. So Boston. I said, Boston? I look at the map, and Montreal is less than 2-hour drive. Mm-hmm. Boston isn't closer. Mm-hmm. Montreal's closer. Oh, I suppose that's true, they say. But there are so many people who don't think of Canada, don't think of Montreal. I happen to like Montreal. I happen to like Canada. I listen to the CBC all the time, and I enjoy Canada when I'm going up there. And I've never had anyone treat me ill at all, and not wearing a clerical collar either. I've even had my car break down and had to get my brakes repaired at a garage in Montreal, and I wasn't cheated, and I was cared for respectfully, and it just made me feel all the more fond of Canada. But this doesn't seem to happen to many Vermonters. They seem to think more of Boston, as the nearest big city. And I don't know why they feel that way, particularly with so many people whose origins were Canadian. They have a lot of French names. It's strange.
Yeah, but it all comes back again to, I guess, that fundamental question of who we are and how we define ourselves. How do we identify ourselves?
Yeah.
I think in the context of your broader question, the struggles of the spirit, I think that probably is a fundamental issue that's there. When it comes down to the basic question, ultimately for any group is, who are we? Someone may say, who am I? Or the psychologist or the psychiatrist. Sociologists are likely to say that the crucial question is, who are we? And how are we distinguished from others?
Okay, I think we may have a question.
Got somebody on.
All right. Hello, I think we are live here.
Yeah, hi. How you doing? I'm a half French Canadian myself, living in Burlington. And I think the struggles of the spirit, I think we have to get beyond, what we are labeled as far as being French Canadian or American or Canadian, or getting back down to the human side of it.
Absolutely.
Because I've struggled my whole life with the fact that I came from a society that's so bitter to each other, whether it be the English or the French side, and getting down to the human side, I think, is the most important. So we've labeled ourselves over time in society as Americans, or when we're in tribal stages, different than each other at that stage. Wonder what you thought of that part of it.
Well, I think the biggest struggle throughout history has been to try to get beyond those boundaries and to think of people just in human terms.
Yeah. And I'm a bit nervous here on the phone. Don't mind me. I'll probably be clear once I get off the phone.
You're pretty clear.
From the time that we started having an understanding of what we were, and then separating ourselves into groups and having different ideals, and religion is a good example of that these days, where you have so many different types and so many different views, so many different interpretations, and getting down to the base of it, which we all had the original same understanding, then piling on different interpretations over the years seems to have separated us all.
Yeah. Yes, religion is a peculiar thing because it very often expresses itself in universal terms, that this religion is a religion for all peoples. And yet the existence of multiple religions leads to conflict among them, so that people become very, very intense, and it just doesn't manifest itself in the conflict between one religion and another, between Christianity or Judaism or Christianity and Islam, but within the groups themselves there comes factionalism, and some of the most intense conflicts have been those between factions within a single religion. So I
find that to be a bit of a shame, because there are instances in our lives where we get down to the human side, whether it be just letting somebody in front of you in traffic, whether it be opening a door for somebody. That's like the simple human spirit coming through. And then I think if we could spread that, it's easy to say these words, but it's hard to put it in theory, because I'm probably not the kindest person in traffic myself, so that happens. That's my human side.
But you're working on it.
But I think it's interesting to open a dialogue about the differences that we have, and just keep, even if it is just opening a door for somebody day by day, or saying a kind word to somebody.
I think in fact we're living in an era when perhaps more than ever before, the need to have a sense of universal human interests is there. The notion of communicating instantaneously with all parts of the world, the idea that the world has become a global village, is the kind of thing that pushes the sense we've got to get beyond national identities, or we need to get beyond religious identities into a recognition that we've all got some basic fundamental things that we've got to work together on. And that one of our definitions, who we are, is we are the human beings on Earth. Then we come along with the reissuing of the Star Wars trilogy, and a thing like that is an interesting lesson of, wait a minute, we're out there among the stars, And what are we going to do the first time that we encounter sentient beings from another part of the universe?
Well, I used to say it'd be great to be in a Star Trek society, but then even Star Trek has their Klingons, and
Yeah,
so
right.
I guess it gets continued as we still have enemies out there, no matter where we go.
Yeah.
Or we create our enemies in our concepts.
Once we...
Like I'm married a Texan, and I'm half French Canadian. My daughter was born in Colorado. She's 4 years old, and so we're sort of working on that. We have cousins in Germany and Mexico, so we're trying to get an international. I think the second or third generation for us might be so mixed that these won't be issues anymore, but hopefully that'll come out.
Yeah. Yeah, but, once, I think, again, I think about our interests in these space stories, Star Trek and Star Wars. But the thing is, even if we start thinking about the interests of the Earth, then we still think that there's still the we versus them.
Yeah.
And so our fantasies now move in beyond Earth and say, even if we could agree as human beings, as a species, we'd still have to recognize that we are separate and distinct. So that matter of developing universal concepts is a very, very difficult one.
Yeah, because we're just a small little planet. When you think, my wife's a scientist, when you think of going from a microscopic level to a universal level, how small we are in that whole big picture. It's kind of pretentious of us sometimes to think that it's just a planet-wide problem. It's like you're saying, it's a universal concept that wherever we came from, we'll never really know. In this lifetime, anyway.
For me, I think one of the things that helps break down these barriers, international barriers, is personal experience. And my own father in World War I, he fought on the side of the Allies and was in France. My father-in-law fought on the side of the Austrians. And he was on the other side. And the doctor who delivered both of our children, he also was a ski trooper fighting for the Austrians. So who's the bad guy? Who deserves to die, my father or my father-in-law?
Well, it's like that saying, who's to say what's good and what's bad?
So the whole thing falls apart. So for me, every human being on the earth is my sister or my brother. I may have trouble with them, relating to them for one reason or another, but they're still my blood brother and my blood sister.
Yeah, it's getting back down to the basic underlying level of everything.
Yeah.
And then, but it's all the stuff that we've piled on, whether it was through conditioning or our own beliefs. And it's like you say, it's just remembering to get back down to that center, which is, I think, is the basis of all good-spirited religions, I would say. Because I'm sure there's a lot of self-serving stuff out there, as in anything in politics or life or whatever. But if we get back down to that basic level, I think that's where we at least find our own, like a sanctuary, if we can.
Well, thank you so much for your input.
Well, thanks.
Very helpful. We are glad to hear from you who are listening, and glad that you participate. Like you have had a seat here, and I feel like there've been three of us.
There you go.
Really?
So I got a little less nervous at the end. It's too bad I can't monopolize your show, but I'll let you go.
Well, thank you for being there.
Okay, bye now.
Bye-bye. I think that's the right one.
Well, are we ready for another caller?
I think so. That was a good one. It was very helpful.
I like that discourse. Toward the end of his comment, he talked about getting down to the core, to the center, that there are personal decisions to be made. Individuals have to make them. I guess as a sociologist, I'll think that once two people begin communicating with each other about how they see things, then they become a group in themselves. They become a we. And their discourse then will begin to take on the quality of we and them, all the others that are not within our group of two or within our group of three. And so the more you broaden it beyond individual feelings, once you involve others, you begin to just get into the we-they duality. And I think that sucks us into the possibility of conflicts. And you may be able to get 2 or 3 to agree on some absolute values, but they do that in the context that we are agreed, but what about the rest of them out there? So we may be involved in an inescapable kind of problem that we can never come to a universal agreement here on this earth or within this solar system or within this universe as to the core values that we all share.
Yeah, speaking of core values, I thought, as you spoke a little while ago, Bob, about the 10 Commandments. When I was a kid, I think they were even taught in the public school. And if you think about it, they aren't just Christian, they're Islamic, they're Jewish, I guess they're not Buddhist or Hindu, but I can't imagine they would deeply object to them. To not covet your neighbor's Mercedes or spouse is not a bad absolute dictum to follow.
But the 10 Commandments themselves, they never were absolutes. One of the principles is thou shalt not kill, but there are all kinds of exceptions
right.
that have been made to that.
In God's name, even.
And I think all sorts of redefinitions have been made, and the society has accepted the idea that there can be circumstances under which the killing is justified or excused. So the absolutes turn out not to be absolutes once you begin to examine them closely. I think it's a real struggle to think of anything that people are 100% agreed about. I think a few decades ago, someone tried surveying groups with regard to their feelings on certain kinds of criminal actions or actions that may be described as crimes. And the thing that he got the highest level agreement on had to do with the sexual abuse of children. That's probably up around 99% of a public disapproving of that sort of thing. Although you would get some variations, or at least 99% of the American public. But if you went to other groups in the world, you would find that sexual contact with children didn't have the same high level of disapproval. But that does mean that things like actions that could be defined as murder, actions that could be defined as sexual assault among human beings, that have much less levels of agreement than that one does. And you still don't have 100% agreement that this is that sexual contact with children should not occur. And the evidence is that there are people out there who pursue that as a way of life. So I think that's the one that you can come closest to on getting the widest range of agreement. This is wrong.
In our society, anyway.
In our society, this is wrong behavior.
I have some good friends from Southeast Asia, and they tell me that well, it's usually parents or family regularly manipulate the sexual genitalia of boys or little girls, not so much for their own pleasure, but just giving the child pleasure. And they see nothing morally wrong about it, no more than tickling somebody or having them hold their hand or or whatever. So it's quite accepted in some societies.
Yeah, 20th century anthropology is really the kind of thing that got us sensitive to a cultural relativism, and like so many other generations of college students back in the 1950s and such, I read Ruth Benedict's Patterns of Culture, and then the books of Margaret Mead, which raised the matter: can you find a situation in which there is a universal value? And those kinds of publications began to call that in question. And I'm not sure that people are reading Mead and Benedict very much more, but this notion of a cultural relativism has become a dominant idea here in the in the 20th century. It may turn out that the only absolute we have is that everything is relative.
But when it's current for people to believe in, they will often say this is an absolute, a real absolute.
Yeah.
And even though they may change it sometime later. I mean, women were considered, as you well know as a sociologist, women were not considered eligible to vote. They're just, it was inappropriate. I think we have another phone call. Let's see. I guess not. Maybe that's...
Well, maybe we're just running down to the last 5 minutes or so.
Okay. But it was 1920, I believe, when women were given the right to vote and the right to own property. And it was an absolute understanding before that women, because of their menses, they just weren't, scientifically speaking, able to take responsible positions. And that was an absolute. And then we have very certainly tossed that off.
Yeah, well, there have been a lot of transformations that have occurred here in the 20th century in terms of redefining who we are, and I think that's one of them. We've redefined the we-ness in terms of gender, in terms of age, in terms of ethnicity, to the extent of broadening and saying more people, larger and larger numbers of people, regardless of the particular characteristics they may carry of gender or age or ethnicity, are to be brought in and have full partnership. That's becoming a much stronger value than ever existed. And I think that's an indication of the transformation of how you define who we are. Mm-hmm. It's always said, we the people of the United States, the preamble to the Constitution. We the people of the United States in order to form a more perfect union. And the reality would be that when the words were written, we the people meant we the adult males, the adult white, the adult white free males of the United States. Yeah. But we the people has been redefined. Similarly, of course, we look at the Declaration of Independence and Thomas Jefferson's statement, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Men, yes. Well, all men, but regardless of whether all men are created equal, the reality was that not all human beings were being treated as equal, either in terms of gender or ethnicity. Yeah. I'm not sure what Bob... I guess we're down to about 1 minute more. I guess so. So I guess it'll be time for you to wrap up. Okay, well, thank you very much for tuning in to Channel 15 and for listening to us today. I guess the time is going faster, Bob, than I thought. We appreciate your giving us your attention, and we thank the caller who called in. I'm glad we had that caller. Yeah. And I thank you, Bob, for being here and for lending us your expertise. It's been a delight to have you. Well, I think it'll be interesting to see the views of others that will be coming in to join you over the next few weeks. Yeah, well, every Wednesday. So thank you again, and we'll see you next week.